The forest was quiet that morning. The wind moved slowly through the tall pine trees and sunlight fell like gold on the wet ground. A man walked through the forest path carrying a small metal bag over his shoulder. His name was Mark, a human soldier who had returned from war after many long years away from Earth. He had seen things no one should ever see. He had fought on red planets with no air, had stood beside machines that burned the sky, and had watched friends vanish in battles that no one would remember. He wanted no more noise, no more orders, and no more fighting. He wanted peace, even if it was short. The path ended near a small hill, and at the top stood his old wooden cabin. It was the only place on Earth that still belonged to him. The cabin was made of dark logs and stone. It had a small chimney, a single porch, and a roof covered in leaves and moss. It looked almost the same as when he left it years ago, only older and quieter. Mark stood there for a moment, breathing in the smell of pine and soil. His heart felt heavy and calm at the same time. He walked up the small steps and pushed open the door. He expected to see dust, spiders, and the cold smell of old wood, but what he saw made him freeze where he stood. The cabin was warm. The fire in the fireplace was burning softly. There was a pot of something boiling on the stove, and the table had a cup of tea sitting on it. There was no dust anywhere. The air smelled clean and fresh, like flowers and metal. Mark reached for the small sidearm on his belt. His mind became alert the same way it had been during battle. He looked around carefully, his boots making soft sounds on the wooden floor. He stepped toward the window, and that was when he saw her. Standing near the window was a woman. Her skin was pale with a faint green tint that caught the sunlight. Her hair was silver white, long enough to fall past her shoulders. Her eyes were bright and strange, almost glowing like moonlight. She wore simple clothes, but her shape and presence were not human. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound came from the fire. Mark's hand stayed close to his weapon, but he did not raise it. The woman turned her head slowly and looked at him. Her voice was calm when she spoke. "You are back," she said. Mark blinked. "Who are you, and what are you doing in my cabin?" The woman looked at the cup of tea and then back at him. "My name is Rena. I have been living here for some time." "I did not know anyone owned this place," Mark frowned. He looked around again. His old blanket was folded neatly on the bed. His tools were arranged carefully on the table. Everything looked used but cared for. Whoever she was, she had not broken anything or stolen from him. Still, his cabin was his. "This is my home," Mark said firmly. "You need to leave." Rena's silver eyes softened. "I cannot. If I go outside, they might find me." Mark narrowed his eyes. "Who is they?" Rena hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly, and she moved closer to the window as if listening to something far away. "The ones who destroyed my home world. They came after us, and I ran. I found this place because it was quiet. I thought I was safe." Mark did not believe her. Many alien races had come to Earth after the wars. Some were friendly, some were not. The military had warned that some refugees carried hidden dangers or secret missions. He could not trust her just because she looked peaceful. He stepped closer. "You need to tell me the truth. Are you one of the rebels? Did you come here to spy on humans?" Rena shook her head quickly. "No, I am not one of them. I escaped from them. My ship crashed nearby months ago. I have been hiding here ever since." Mark studied her carefully. She looked weak but calm. Her clothes were torn and patched in places. There was a faint glowing mark on her right arm, like a scar made of light. It pulsed slowly in rhythm with her heartbeat. He had seen something like it before on alien medics during the war. He lowered his weapon slightly. "If your story is true, you are lucky to still be alive." Rena gave a small smile. "I do not feel lucky," Mark sighed. He did not want to fight anyone anymore. He had come here to rest, not to argue with an alien refugee. Still, she was in his cabin, and that made it his problem. He walked past her and set his bag down on the table. "You can stay tonight," he said finally. "But tomorrow you will have to find another place." Rena nodded. "Thank you." Mark sat on the wooden chair near the fire. The warmth felt good after the long journey. Rena sat on the floor near the window, keeping her distance. For a while they did not speak. The forest outside grew darker as the sun went down. When night came, strange sounds echoed from the woods. The air vibrated faintly like the low hum of engines. Mark looked up and reached for his weapon again. "What is that?" he asked. Rena stood and moved to the door. "Do not open it," she said in a quiet but strong voice. Mark frowned. "Why?" "They are searching," she whispered. "If they sense movement, they will come. Mark's instincts told him she was serious. He stayed still and listened. The sound grew louder, like wings made of metal. For a moment, a bright blue light flashed through the window, then vanished. The forest went silent again. Rena let out a slow breath. "They are gone for now." Mark looked at her closely. There was no fear in her voice, only exhaustion. He realized that she had probably been running from those things for a long time. He placed the weapon back on the table. "I do not know who they are," he said, "but if they come back, I will not let them take you." Rena looked surprised. "You would help me?" "I do not like uninvited guests," Mark said simply. "And I do not like hunters." Rena gave a soft smile and nodded. "Then I am safe here tonight." She went to the fireplace and added a small piece of wood. The flames grew brighter, lighting her silver hair and strange eyes. For the first time, Mark noticed that she looked almost human when she smiled. He leaned back and stared into the fire. He thought about the wars, the faces of his fallen friends, and the emptiness he had carried since then. He never thought he would meet someone like her in a quiet forest on Earth. The night grew colder and the fire burned low. Rena sat silently near the wall, watching the window as if she could still sense danger. Mark finally closed his eyes, his mind heavy with confusion and curiosity. When he woke the next morning, the forest was filled with fog. Birds called in the distance. The smell of warm food filled the cabin again. Rena was cooking something on the stove. She turned and smiled slightly when she saw him awake. "Good morning," she said. Mark sat up and rubbed his eyes. He felt a strange calm inside him, something he had not felt in years. "You really made breakfast," he said. "I wanted to thank you," she replied. He nodded and looked out the window. The forest seemed peaceful, but he knew the peace would not last. Whoever those hunters were, they would return, and when they did, he would be ready. For now, the cabin was quiet again. The soldier and the alien shared the same small room, bound by fear and fate, not yet knowing how deeply their lives would soon change. The fire crackled softly as the wind moved through the trees outside. For the first time since he left the war, Mark felt something that almost felt like hope. The morning sun rose slowly above the trees. The forest around the cabin was covered in thin mist, and the sound of birds filled the air. Mark stepped outside with his old jacket on, breathing the cool air deeply. It had been years since he had felt the peace of morning on Earth. The smell of pine and wet leaves filled his chest. For a few short moments, he almost forgot about wars, machines, and the stars. Inside the cabin, Rena was moving quietly. She cleaned the dishes and packed the small pot she used for cooking. Her movements were careful and calm, but her silver eyes kept watching the windows. Mark noticed how alert she always seemed, like a hunted creature that never truly rested. When he came back in, she looked at him and said, "You were gone too long." "It is not safe out there." Mark smiled faintly. "It is my forest. I built this cabin myself. Nothing here scares me." Rena looked toward the trees and shook her head. "You think you are alone, but the sky above us is full of watchers. They will not stop until they find me." Mark frowned and sat down near the fire. "You said last night they were searching. Who are they, really?" Rena was silent for a while before answering. "They are hunters. They were created by a war race called the Dreth. My people were once slaves under them. When we broke free, the Dreth built machines to chase us across the stars. Those machines never sleep and they track by energy. I can hide from them for some time, but when they get close, they feel my presence." Mark listened carefully. The words reminded him of his own battles. The Dreth had been one of humanity's oldest enemies. He had fought them before, long ago, on a planet of ice. He knew how deadly they were, and how their machines hunted without mercy. He looked at Rena's glowing scar. "That mark on your arm, is that how they track you?" Rena covered the mark with her sleeve quickly. "Yes, it was placed on me when I was taken prisoner. I escaped, but I could not remove it. It binds me to their sensors. It is the reason I must stay hidden." Mark felt a strange mix of anger and pity. He had seen soldiers suffer under alien control, but seeing it now on Earth made it more real. "There must be a way to remove it," he said. "There is, but the tools were lost with my ship," she replied quietly. "It crashed 2 valleys away. I could not reach it again. The hunters guard that place now." Mark stood and looked toward the north window. The forest stretched endlessly in that direction. Somewhere beyond the trees lay the wreck of her ship, and maybe answers he did not want to find. Still, he felt a duty rising inside him. I will go there, he said. Rena's eyes widened. No, you cannot. It is too dangerous. I fought worse things, Mark replied firmly. I know how to move unseen. If we can remove that mark, they will stop tracking you. Then maybe both of us can live in peace. Rena stepped closer. You do not have to help me. I brought danger to your home. I should leave before it comes again. Mark shook his head. Leaving will not stop them. They will come here anyway. I prefer to end the problem before it reaches my door. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Rena finally nodded. If you truly wish to go, I will show you the way. They spent the rest of the morning preparing. Mark checked his old rifle, cleaning the barrel and replacing the battery cells. Rena gave him a small glowing stone that she said could hide his life signature from scanners for a short time. He placed it around his neck, unsure if it would really work. Before they left, Rena placed her hand on the wall of the cabin. This place feels alive, she said softly. It reminds me of my home before the war. Mark looked at her and said, Then we will make sure it stays safe. They moved quietly through the forest, staying close to the thick trees. Rena walked lightly, leaving no sound behind. Her eyes scanned every shadow, while Mark used his training to find safe paths. The deeper they went, the darker the woods became. The sound of birds grew distant, replaced by the whisper of the wind through the leaves. After some time, they reached a clearing. The ground was blackened, and pieces of silver metal were half buried in the soil. The air smelled of burnt ozone. Mark crouched and touched one of the metal shards. It was smooth and warm. Is this from your ship? He asked. Rena nodded. The main body is farther ahead. Be careful. The hunters placed sensors around it. Mark moved slowly, his eyes searching the ground. He found thin metal spikes hidden under the leaves, each pulsing with a faint blue light. They were motion detectors. He disabled one using his knife, careful not to trigger an alarm. Rena followed behind him silently. Her glowing scar flickered faster as they moved closer. They are near, she whispered. Suddenly, a sharp noise echoed through the forest. A beam of blue light shot from the trees, hitting the ground near them. Mark rolled behind a fallen log and pulled Rena down beside him. 3 tall figures stepped out of the shadows. The hunters had metal armor shaped like insect shells. Their faces were hidden behind black masks with bright red eyes. Each carried a weapon that glowed with blue energy. Mark whispered, "Stay down." He raised his rifle and fired once. The beam hit the nearest hunter's chest, sending sparks into the air. The creature fell, but the others spread out fast. One fired at their position, burning a hole through the log. Rena closed her eyes and placed her hand on her glowing scar. A white shield of light appeared around them, blocking the next shot. Mark looked at her in surprise. You can do that? She nodded weakly. Only for a short time. Mark took the chance and fired again, hitting another hunter in the shoulder. The third one aimed high, trying to flank them. Mark rolled out from behind the log, shot once more, and struck the creature's leg. It fell with a metallic scream. When the fight ended, silence filled the clearing. Smoke rose from the ground and the air smelled of burnt metal. Rena's shield vanished and she collapsed to her knees, breathing heavily. Mark ran to her side. Are you hurt? I used too much energy, she said in a tired voice. The mark drains my strength when I defend. He helped her stand. Then we will finish this quickly. They moved deeper into the wreck site. The remains of her ship lay broken across the ground, half covered by moss and dirt. Inside the cracked hull, faint light still glowed. Rena walked toward the central console and pressed her hand against it. The mark on her arm responded with a dim pulse. This is where the tool is kept, she said. She opened a small compartment and pulled out a round metal device with a glowing ring. This can erase the mark, but it needs power. The ship's core is empty. Mark looked around. His eyes landed on a fallen power cell near the wall. This might work. He connected the wires and the ring on the device started to glow brighter. Rena placed the device on her arm, and a sharp flash filled the cabin. Mark turned his head away. When he looked back, the glowing mark on her skin had vanished. Rena looked at him with wide eyes, tears forming at the corners. It worked, she whispered. Before Mark could answer, a loud metallic roar shook the forest. More hunters were coming. The sky above turned red as small ships moved through the clouds. Rena looked terrified. They must have sensed the energy pulse. Mark grabbed his rifle. Then we run. They sprinted through the forest, dodging trees and jumping over roots. Blue light beams struck the ground behind them. The sound of engines filled the air. Rena stumbled once and Mark caught her hand, pulling her forward. When they reached the river that cut through the valley, Mark turned and fired several times, hitting one of the flying drones chasing them. It exploded in the air. Rena used the last of her energy to send a burst of white light toward the others, blinding them for a moment. They crossed the river and hid under a large rock ledge. The sound of engines slowly faded. Mark sat down, breathing hard. Rena leaned against the wall, weak but alive. "We cannot stay here long," she said softly. "They will return." Mark nodded. "Then we will make a plan. I will not let them hunt you again." She looked at him with tired eyes. "Why are you helping me, Mark? You could have walked away." He looked out at the trees. "Because I know what it feels like to be hunted. And because I am tired of running from who I am. I am a soldier and soldiers protect." Rena gave a faint smile. "Then maybe humanity is not as cruel as we were told." Mark looked at her and replied, "Humanity fights to survive, but sometimes we also fight to save." The sound of wind filled the valley. The two sat quietly under the rock hidden from the sky. The war might have followed them home, but Mark had already made his choice. He would defend his cabin, his forest, and now the alien woman who had become part of it. The sky above the forest was dark and full of clouds. The moon hid behind them, leaving the woods in heavy shadow. Mark and Rena had returned to the cabin before sunset, moving carefully through the trees. They were tired and wet from crossing the river, but they had made it back alive. Inside, the fire burned low, casting soft light on the wooden walls. Mark checked his rifle while Rena sat near the window, staring outside. She could feel the faint hum in the air, the same signal she had sensed the night before. The hunters were close again. "They will come tonight," she said quietly. Mark looked up from his weapon. "Then we will be ready." He had already set traps around the cabin. Wires connected to small explosives and alarms ran between the trees. He had dug shallow holes covered with leaves, just like the ones he had used in off-world wars. The cabin was no longer just a home. It was now a small fortress. Rena watched him with calm eyes. "You are still a soldier," she said softly. Mark nodded. "I never stopped being one. I just wanted to forget for a while." Rena looked at the scar on her arm where the glowing mark had once been. It was now only a faint line. She was free from the hunter's tracker. But they had already found her signal once. They would not stop until they finished their mission. "Do you think they know where we are?" she asked. Mark glanced at the sky. "Maybe. But if they come, we will show them that this forest belongs to us." The hours passed slowly. The forest outside was silent except for the whisper of the wind. The night felt heavy, like something was waiting. Mark sat near the fire, cleaning his rifle again while Rena rested with her eyes closed. She needed to recover her strength, but her breathing stayed uneven. When midnight came, the silence broke. A faint hum spread through the air, followed by a flash of blue light in the sky. Mark stood at once, rifle in hand. Rena's eyes opened wide. "They are here," she said. Outside, shapes moved between the trees. The sound of metal feet crushed the leaves. Mark could see 3, maybe 4 figures glowing faintly in the dark. The traps he had set were ready. He pressed a button on the small device in his hand. A flash of fire burst outside as one of the traps exploded. The ground shook and one hunter fell. The others spread out quickly. Their glowing eyes scanned through the darkness. Blue beams of energy shot toward the cabin, hitting the walls and windows. Mark ducked behind the table, firing back through a crack. His shot hit another hunter in the chest, making it fall backward. Rena stood near the wall, her hands glowing faintly. She whispered something in her alien language, and a white shield appeared over the windows. The next few beams struck the shield and bounced away. Mark looked at her. "That will not hold for long, I know," she said. "But it will give us time." The door suddenly shook under a heavy hit. The hunters were trying to break it down. Mark threw a small metal sphere toward the entrance. It exploded in a bright flash, sending smoke through the air. He ran to the door and kicked it open, firing at the nearest shadow. The hunter fell, its armor smoking, but another one jumped from the side and hit him hard. He fell back, the rifle slipping from his hands. The creature raised its weapon, but before it could shoot, Rena lifted her hand. A wave of white energy struck the hunter, throwing it against a tree outside. Mark grabbed his rifle and aimed again. The air smelled of smoke and metal. The forest was glowing with flashes of blue and white light. The quiet cabin had turned into a battlefield. When the last hunter fell, Mark stood still, his breathing heavy. The forest grew silent again. The fires burned low, leaving the smell of ash behind. Rena knelt on the floor, her hands shaking. The light around her faded slowly. Mark walked to her side. "Are you all right?" She nodded weakly. "I used too much energy again. But I will recover." He looked around. "We cannot stay here anymore. They know this place now." Rena looked toward the window. "They will call for more. Hunters always come in groups. The next attack will be larger." Mark clenched his jaw. "Then we leave before dawn." He began gathering supplies. Food, water, spare batteries, and a few grenades from his old bag. Rena watched him quietly. "Where will we go?" she asked. "There is an old military outpost in the mountains," he said. "It is hidden, built for emergencies. If it still has power, we can use its signal to contact command." Rena frowned. "Do you trust your command?" Mark paused for a moment. "I do not know. But it is better than waiting here to die." Rena nodded slowly. "Then we go together." Before leaving, Mark stepped outside to check the area one last time. The bodies of the hunters lay scattered across the ground, smoking faintly. He knelt beside one of them and removed its helmet. Under the mask was no face, only a dark metal skull with red lights glowing deep inside. "They are machines," he said. Rena joined him. The Dreth made them after losing too many soldiers to humans. These hunters are part machine, part memory. They do not feel, they only obey. Mark stared at the metal skull. "Then they will never stop." He covered the remains with leaves and turned back toward the cabin. The fire inside was dying. The place that had once been his only home now looked broken and burned. Rena watched him quietly. "I am sorry," she said. He looked at her and shook his head. "It was just wood and stone. It can be rebuilt. What matters is that we are alive." They rested for a short while before dawn. Mark stayed awake, keeping watch. Rena slept lightly, her breathing slow and soft. The early light of morning began to touch the trees when Mark finally stood. He packed the last of their supplies and woke her gently. "It is time," he said. They left the cabin and began the long walk toward the mountains. The forest stretched endlessly ahead, silent and green. Birds sang again as if the night's battle had never happened. Mark led the way with steady steps, scanning the trees for movement. Rena followed close behind, her eyes full of both fear and determination. Every sound made her tense. Every shadow made her glance upward, but Mark's calm movements gave her some comfort. As they walked, she asked, "Why do humans fight so much? Even when the war ends, you are always ready for another." Mark thought for a moment before answering, "Because peace never stays by itself. Someone has to protect it. Sometimes that means fighting again." Rena looked down. "My people never understood that. We wanted peace without struggle. That is why we fell." Mark gave a faint smile. "Then maybe you will learn from us, and maybe we will learn from you." They continued walking until the sun was high. The air grew colder as they climbed higher into the hills. Rena stopped once to drink from a small stream, and Mark scanned the horizon. In the far distance, a dark shape stood among the rocks. It was the old outpost. "There it is," he said. They reached it by afternoon. The place looked abandoned, covered with vines and moss. The metal doors were half buried in dirt, but they still carried the symbol of the old Earth Defense Force. Mark placed his hand on the scanner, and to his surprise, the light flickered green. The door opened with a heavy sound. Inside was darkness and dust. The air was cold, and the floors were lined with broken machines. Mark used his small light to guide the way. "Stay close," he said. They reached the main room where the communication console stood. Mark wiped the dust from the screen and pressed the power switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the console flickered to life. A faint blue light filled the room. Rena looked at the symbols on the screen. "Can you contact your people?" Mark nodded. "If this system still works, yes. But I need time." As he typed in his old access code, Rena walked around the room. Her hand brushed over the walls. "This place feels sad," she said quietly. "Like it remembers the ones who built it." Mark did not look up. "Many soldiers trained here. Most of them never came back." Suddenly, the screen flashed red. A warning appeared in bright letters. "Unauthorized signal detected." Rena gasped. "They found us again." Mark turned toward the doorway. He could already hear the faint hum in the air. The hunters were not far. He grabbed his rifle and looked at her. "Get ready. They want you, but they will have to go through me first." Rena stood beside him, her eyes glowing faintly once more. "Then we fight together." The wind outside howled through the mountains. The sound of engines grew closer. The war that Mark had hoped to leave behind was now standing at his door again. But this time he was not fighting for orders or medals. He was fighting to protect something real. The soldier and the alien stood side by side as the light of the hunters' ships fell over the rocks. The night attack was over, but the real battle was just beginning. The mountain wind cut sharply across the narrow path leading to the old outpost. Mark and Rena moved carefully, each step measured to avoid loose rocks. The air was thin at this height, and their breaths came heavier with every step, yet neither slowed. They had survived the night attack, and now the mission was more urgent than ever. Inside the outpost, the room was cold and quiet except for the soft hum of the console. Mark examined the flickering screens while Rena moved to a corner and sat, her silver hair reflecting the pale light. She seemed exhausted, yet there was a determination in her eyes that Mark had not seen before. "We cannot stay long," she said quietly. "The hunters will send more after me once they realize my tracker is gone." Mark looked up from the console. "Then we need to find a way to warn your people and protect Earth at the same time." Rena shook her head. "I cannot warn them directly. The Dreth monitors every signal in this sector. Any message will be detected and traced back. If they learn my location, Earth will be their next target. That is why I came here." Mark ran a hand through his hair. "So you came to hide on Earth?" "Yes," she said softly. "I hope to find safety, but they are relentless. If I do not act, they will strike again and your planet will suffer." Mark studied her face. Her expression was calm, but her voice carried weight. She had lived through war and destruction on a level he could barely imagine. Yet now she was asking him, a single human soldier, to help save not just her, but Earth itself. "Show me the plan," Mark said finally. Rena stood and moved toward a small console on the wall, pulling a device from a hidden compartment. It was round, metallic, and pulsed with faint blue light. She placed it on the table in front of Mark. "This is the Dreth Communication Archive," she explained. "It contains maps of their fleets, patrol routes, and strike strategies. If we can activate it, we can learn their next moves and warn Earth's defense systems." Mark leaned forward. The device hummed gently, almost alive. "How do we activate it?" Rena pointed to the small panel on the side. "It needs a human code. Only someone who has served in military operations can unlock its security protocols." "That is why I need you." Mark's jaw tightened. He had not used his old access codes in years. The thought of returning to that world of protocols, numbers, and secret channels made him uneasy. Yet he could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down. He was the only one who could do this. He placed his hand on the panel and typed the codes he had memorized. The device clicked and hummed louder. Lights flickered across its surface and a holographic map appeared, showing the vastness of space beyond Earth. Red dots moved along invisible paths, fleet positions, patrols, and strike points. "They are planning something," Rena whispered, leaning over the hologram. "This is larger than I imagined. The Dreth are moving to conquer this sector. Earth is the next target if we do not act." Mark's eyes scanned the map. The fleets were organized, efficient, and relentless. "We cannot stop them alone," he said. Rena shook her head. "We might not have to. I can link this device to Earth's satellites. If I combine my energy with the device, it can send a signal that disables the Dreth's navigation systems temporarily. The fleet will lose coordination and Earth's defense systems will have a chance to prepare." Mark frowned. "You would risk yourself to do that?" "Yes," she said simply. "If I fail, I will not survive. But if I succeed, many lives will be saved. Earth will have a chance." Mark studied her carefully. She was strong, yet vulnerable. Her energy would drain quickly and the process could be fatal, but he could not allow fear to stop him now. "Then we do it," he said. Rena nodded and began connecting the device to the outpost's energy core. Sparks flew as wires linked the metallic orb to the console. The blue light of the device grew brighter, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Mark stood beside her, rifle ready, scanning the perimeter. Every shadow seemed alive. He could feel the presence of hunters approaching even now. They were fast, precise, and deadly. "They will come for you again," Mark said quietly. Rena gave a faint smile. "Then I am glad you are here." The device hummed louder. Blue lines of energy traced across the walls, forming a web of light. Rena placed her hands on the device, her fingers glowing faintly. The energy pulsed through her body and she gasped. Mark held her arm. "Are you sure you can handle this?" "I have no choice," she replied. Focus on defense. Do not let them breach the walls, Mark nodded. He moved to the windows and doors, checking his traps. Metal spikes, tripwires, and small charges were all ready. If the hunters came, he would fight with everything he had. Minutes passed, each one heavier than the last. The outpost hummed with energy and Rena's body glowed brighter. The device responded to her touch, its light forming a bridge between Earth and the Dreth fleets. Suddenly, the forest outside erupted with movement. Hunters emerged from the shadows, glowing faintly in the night. They had followed the trail to the mountains. Mark opened fire, hitting the nearest hunter with precise shots. Sparks flew as the beam weapon hit its armor. Rena's shield flared up again, white energy rippling across the windows. The hunter's beam struck the shield and bounced away. One managed to break through a weak point, but Mark tackled it, smashing its armor with the butt of his rifle. Rena cried out as she pushed more energy into the device. Sweat ran down her forehead and her breathing became sharp. The glow around her arms intensified, sending arcs of light across the room. Mark glanced at her. "Hold on, you can do this!" She nodded, focusing on the device. Her hands moved with precision, energy flowing through every circuit. The holographic map brightened, and the paths of the Dreth fleets blinked red and yellow. The signal was being sent. Outside, the hunters hesitated. Machines do not feel, but they recognize threats. The pulse from the device disrupted their systems. Some froze in place while others turned back toward the trees, confused. Mark fired at the remaining machines, taking them down one by one. Sparks and metal flew in every direction. His muscles burned, but he did not stop. Every hunter destroyed brought a small measure of safety to Rena and the device. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the device emitted a high-pitched hum and then fell silent. Rena collapsed to the floor, her glow fading. Mark caught her before she hit the ground. "Rena, are you okay?" She looked up at him, exhaustion written on her face. "It worked," she whispered. "The signal is sent. The Dreth will lose their fleet coordination for several hours. Earth now has a chance." Mark helped her to sit against the wall. She was weak, trembling, but alive. He pressed a clean cloth to her forehead. "You did it. You saved millions, maybe billions," Rena smiled faintly. "And you helped me survive," Mark shook his head. "We did it together." The two remained in the cold outpost, catching their breath. Outside, the forest was quiet again. The hunters had retreated, at least for now. The outpost had survived, and the signal had been sent. Earth had a chance to prepare for the coming invasion. Rena leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I have never felt so safe," she said softly. "Even with the danger being here with you, it is different." Mark looked down at her. He had fought on many planets, seen countless deaths, and survived endless battles. Yet for the first time in years he felt hope, not just for survival but for the possibility of connection, trust, and something more than war. "We will survive," he said. "We will fight if they return, but we will survive together." Rena nodded, a faint glow still in her eyes. The cabin, the forest, and now the mountains had become more than places to hide. They were a beginning. Mark looked out at the horizon where the first light of dawn touched the mountains. Somewhere beyond the clouds, Dreth fleets would try to strike Earth, but thanks to them, humanity had a chance. And for the first time, he believed that even in a universe filled with war, courage and hope could prevail. The soldier and the alien woman remained side by side, ready for whatever the universe would send next. The sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The cold wind swept through the rocky peaks, carrying the scent of pine and fresh snow. Mark and Rena stood outside the outpost, looking down at the valley below. The forest stretched endlessly, quiet and untouched, but they both knew it was only the calm before the storm. The Dreth fleet would soon respond to the signal that Rena had sent. Machines that had hunted her across galaxies were now mobilizing again, but this time Earth would be ready. Mark felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. Every life on the planet, every forest, every city depended on what they would do next. Rena touched the small device that still glowed faintly in her hands. "The signal worked," she said. "The Dreth navigation systems are disrupted. Their ships will be unable to coordinate for several hours. Earth's defense forces will have time to prepare." Mark nodded. "Then we have a window. We need to use it wisely." He pulled his rifle from his shoulder and checked the magazines. He had prepared traps around the outpost, reinforced doors, and cleared the surrounding paths of debris. Every detail mattered. He had learned that from years of fighting and endless wars. Rena looked at him with admiration. "You are a true soldier, Mark, not just skilled but careful. You protect, not destroy." He gave a faint smile. "That is all any soldier can do. Protect what is important. Sometimes that is a life. Sometimes that is a home. And sometimes it is a planet." They moved inside the outpost to monitor the Dreth fleet. The holographic display from the device still hovered in the air, showing fleets of ships scattered across space. Red dots blinked erratically, indicating confusion in the Dreth ranks. Blue lights flashed on the map, showing Earth's defensive satellites ready to respond. Rena's eyes scanned the data quickly. "The largest fleet is approaching from the northern sector. They will try to strike your cities first. If we can coordinate with Earth's defense systems, we can block them before they reach populated areas." Mark nodded. "Then we begin." He tapped into the console and sent encrypted signals to the nearest Earth command station. His fingers moved with precision, recalling old codes and protocols. For the first time in years, he felt useful again. Not just a soldier, but a guide, a protector. Outside, the wind howled as if echoing the tension in the mountains. Every shadow in the forest seemed alive, every movement could hide a threat. Mark kept watch at the window while Rena worked on the console. Hours passed, each one slower than the last, but they did not rest. Finally, a response came. Earth's defense forces confirmed they had received the signal. Fighter ships began launching from secret bases. Satellites adjusted their positions and planetary shields powered up. The Dreth would find their attack disrupted. Rena leaned against the console, exhausted. "It worked," she whispered. "Earth will be ready for them." Mark placed a hand on her shoulder. "We are not done yet. They will come, and we must be ready to fight." As if on cue, the first Dreth ships appeared on the horizon. They glowed faintly in the distance, moving fast and precise. The machines were tall and dark, with red lights on their hulls. Their weapons glimmered as if ready to fire. Mark and Rena watched in silence. The forest and mountains below seemed small against the threat in the sky. Yet they did not feel fear. They had faced worse together. They had survived when odds seemed impossible. Rena touched the device again, her hands glowing faintly. "I can help Earth's weapon systems target them more efficiently, but it will drain my energy. I cannot do it for long." Mark looked at her, concern in his eyes. "Then I will protect you while you focus. Nothing will reach you while I am here." They worked as a team. Rena connected her energy to the device, enhancing the signals that guided Earth's defense satellites. Beams of light shot from orbit, striking Dreth ships before they could reach the planet. Explosions erupted in the sky, metal twisted and burned, and machines fell one after another. Mark fired his rifle at the few hunters that had managed to reach the valley. He moved swiftly, using every shadow, every tree, every rock to his advantage. His training, experience, and instinct were unmatched. Each shot he fired protected Rena, the outpost, and the valley below. The fight lasted for hours. Rena's energy waned, her glow dimming as she concentrated. Mark stayed by her side, guiding her movements and defending the outpost. Together, they created a shield of hope that pushed back the Dreth. Finally, the remaining Dreth ships faltered. The devices that had been coordinated by Rena's energy were too strong. Beams of light struck the largest ships, disabling their engines and weapons. Machines fell from the sky in sparks of blue and silver. Rena collapsed to the floor, exhausted but alive. Mark caught her before she hit the ground. "You did it," he said, relief flooding his voice. "You saved Earth," she smiled weakly. "We did it together." Mark helped her to sit against the wall. Outside, the valley was calm again. The forest had survived. The mountains had survived. Humanity had survived. For the first time in years, Mark allowed himself to feel the weight of victory, not loss. Rena looked at him, her eyes soft and bright. "I have never met a human like you," she said. "Strong, brave, and yet compassionate. You remind me why I chose to help your planet instead of hiding forever." Mark looked at her, realizing that for the first time, he felt a connection that was more than survival. "We all have a choice," he said. "I chose to protect. You chose to fight for peace. That is why we succeeded." The sun rose higher, casting warm light through the windows of the outpost. Birds began to sing in the forest below. The valley seemed alive again, untouched by the violence that had passed through the night. Mark and Rena stayed in the outpost for a few more hours, ensuring that no remaining Dreth scouts could reach them. Once satisfied, Mark looked out at the horizon. The sky was clear, and the Dreth ships had disappeared, retreating into space, unable to regroup. Rena leaned against him, exhausted but smiling faintly. "Do you think they will come back?" Mark shook his head. "Even if they do, we will be ready. Earth has defenders now, and we will not let them succeed." They began to make plans for the future. The outpost would remain a safe place for them, a base to monitor potential threats and a sanctuary for those in need. Together, they would protect the planet from dangers beyond the stars. As they prepared, Mark thought about the cabin in the woods. It had been the place where he had found peace once. Now the mountains, the outpost, and the forest below were new symbols of hope. They had fought together, survived together, and built something stronger than fear. Rena rested her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for trusting me," she said softly. Mark smiled faintly. "I did not trust you at first. But now I know that we are stronger together. Humanity and courage combined with your strength can protect even the stars." The wind blew gently through the mountains, carrying the scent of pine and life. The forest seemed to breathe with them, alive and safe. Mark and Rena looked out at the horizon, knowing that the battle was won, yet aware that vigilance would always be necessary. But for now, Earth had survived. Humanity had stood against the vast unknown and proven its strength. And in the quiet moments, Mark realized that sometimes survival was not enough. Sometimes the courage to protect, the strength to fight, and the choice to help others was what truly defined a hero. Rena smiled faintly and squeezed his hand. "We have done more than survive. We have given hope." Mark looked at the rising sun and felt warmth in his chest. For the first time in many years, he felt that peace, courage, and hope could coexist. Together, he and Rena had not only protected Earth, they had proven that humanity could rise, even against the stars themselves. The soldier and the alien woman stood side by side, looking down at the world they had saved. The forest, the valley, and the distant cities would continue to grow and thrive. And as long as they stood together, nothing could break the spirit that had carried them through wars, darkness, and fear. For Mark, for Rena, and for humanity, the fight had ended. But the story of courage, hope, and unity would live on forever.